This is the However Podcast I'm Mike,
I'm Zach.
and we're two dudes just talking about dude stuff.
Okay. Define dude stuff.
Yeah, let's not define it because that could get a little
Dude
bit.
stuff can get weird.
It's not like bromance. We don't want to go down that road, even though they're real.
Yeah. You
All
ever
right.
seen a bromance though? It's kind of wholesome.
It's what?
Wholesome.
Wholesome?
Yeah. Have you ever seen a bromance? Okay, do you know what a bromance is? Do you think it's a gay thing?
No.
Okay.
It's two guys who are really good friends, and it's like they're in that dating phase at the beginning of their relationship when they are getting to know each other. And they're having a little bit of a bromance, and they're two like totally straight guys, or whatever, can be any guy, but they're just getting to know each other, and they kind of like go through a dating phase.
Yeah, sort of. I'd say it's more. I've known you long enough to where I can be completely comfortable with you.
Well, yeah,
It's a bromance.
but I mean,
Like, I love you, bro. I love you too, bro.
Okay,
Close
See-
your eyes, bro. All right, bro. What do
Okay.
you see? I see nothing, bro. That's my world without you, bro.
Okay, now it got weird.
That's bromance.
Okay.
That's what it is. That's what a
Okay.
bromance is.
I've always thought of a bromance was that thing. It's like you only define it as a bromance when it's like in that early phases, like it's a romance, and then after you've been dating or married for a while, it's. Sorry, guys. It eventually it gets to be less of a romance and it's more of a marriage.
Yeah, no, bromance is basically just what seems to be very uncomfortably close relationship with two men, without it being gay.
Okay,
But it's like right in the line. It's right there to being gay.
okay. So anyway, that's how we're going to start today. But that's not what we were really going to. Actually, it kind of does go into what we're going to talk
I
about.
mean, a little bit. That's like the healthier side of what we're talking about.
I suppose it could be.
Sure.
All right. So what are we going to talk about today, Zach?
That's all you.
Okay.
This was your topic. I'm gonna.
topic.
Yeah, you go ahead.
All right. So last week we talked about. We got kind
Not
of
last
emotional. Last episode, we talked about emotions and guys and how that works. So we're gonna kind of take that theme and go a little farther with it today and talk a little bit about healthy boundaries, healthy boundaries, as it pertains to toxic relationships.
Well, if it's a toxic relationship, the boundary is bye-bye.
Okay, but that's the point. Is that if you don't have good boundaries, toxic relationship doesn't end up being bye-bye because you can get stuck in it and think that it's like worth it somehow, or I don't know. If you don't have healthy boundaries, you don't know when to say bye-bye. That's the whole point.
Right. I think the only reason people get into toxic relationships is because they don't set boundaries at the beginning, and toxic people are the ones that manipulate themselves into other people's lives until the other person stops saying or doesn't know how to say no, I guess.
Yeah, but
that's kind of how I see it, at least.
Right. But I mean, with that definition, a toxic relationship is really kind of short term. They manipulated into it. But there are people who you can be in a relationship for years.
Yeah.
And then it becomes toxic. And, just because, and I'm going to go out on a limb here and say, just because it's toxic doesn't mean it has to end. Okay. Toxic means we've gotten to a point where this is not healthy.
Yeah.
And there is an opportunity there where toxic can become healthy. And so just because it's a toxic relationship doesn't mean you bail every single time. Now, most of the time when it comes to crazy, you bail, right?
I actually have a different perception where, to me, a toxic relationship is like an immediate bye-bye.
Okay, well,
and just because to me it's more so if you're, I've kind of gotten to that point where I'm getting more peaceful being by myself, and if you aren't adding to my peace and instead you're disturbing my peace, then it's going to be a pretty short-lived relationship. And that's kind of that. Honestly, that to me, that's what I would encourage other people to do. Is if someone is coming into your life and they're not adding anything to it, all they're doing is sucking you dry, or again disturbing your peace. If you've made peace with yourself and someone comes in who disturbs it, obviously it kind of varies depending on what kind of a relationship we're talking about. You know, if it's like a work relationship or, you know, like a boss or a coworker or something like that, it's a little bit harder to just, you know, wave away. But I'd say in terms of if you're looking at a dating market, if you are reconsidering who your friends are, that's where I would start asking the question, how many of these people or which of these people are adding to your life or taking from it?
Okay.
And if they're disturbing your peace and they're taking from you, then that's one of those you should probably let them go.
Right. And I agree with you, but we're talking short-term relationships, probably not more than a year or two. And all of a sudden they're toxic and it's time to go ahead and either take a break so that you can redefine things or just say goodbye.
We were on a break.
Anyway, but the reason I'm saying that sometimes it can be saved is that there are marriages that have been around for 20 years that can end up starting out being really good for 10 years. And then in year 15, they start getting a little weird. And year 17, it starts getting toxic. I mean, honestly, most marriages go through these phases, right? There's a phase where you're in the honeymoon and everything's great. And healthy marriages actually go through a phase where about year 7, it's like you're in a place where, you know, a lot of people will have kids by that time and their life is changing. And all of a sudden the relationship changes and it starts to feel toxic, right? And in a marriage, I don't actually believe that just bailing at the first sign of toxic is a good idea. I think that when you've vested time into that relationship and you get to a point where you recognize maybe that there's a little bit of toxic going on, maybe there's some unhealthy, maybe boundaries haven't been set because you're in a new phase of your relationship now that you have kids and full-time jobs and all that stuff going on. I think that there's merit in sitting down and going, okay, I married you for a reason and this is important, therefore let's figure this out so that we can be healthy again. And that's actually a really normal process. I know a lot of couples that go through that kind of 7-8 year kind of like, oh my gosh, this is weird now. Okay. So that's what I mean by it's not always just a bye-bye. I mean, the divorce rate in our country is already bad enough. I don't think we need to encourage more people at the first sign of a little toxic to go ahead and be like, hey, bye-bye. You're no longer my mate. Because then you've got kids involved. You've got finances involved. It is an ugly situation.
Especially if you have kids. I used to feel a little bit differently about this where I was under the impression that if you're unhappy, it's reason to bail. And as I've learned more and I've listened to a variety of people and kind of come up with my own conclusion, I'm definitely more on the side of if you have kids, you put your kids' future over your happiness because it's a lot more important. I mean, obviously, this can be a very situational thing.
Oh, yeah.
Obviously, if there is abuse in the home, if it's really serious, then that's something to consider. But if you just get to that 7-year point and now you're just feeling a little bit unhappy because
it's weird,
it's gotten stale, you guys don't do the same kind of things as you used to, everything has just become a pretty standardized routine, and you're just feeling unhappy now, that to me says I'm prioritizing what I want over what's best for not just me, not just for my partner, but for my kids. And that's where I'm kind of like draw the line, because your happiness shouldn't go over your kid's future.
Well, and I agree with you. And sometimes this is why it's so important to understand boundaries, is that as you go through those stages in a relationship, the boundary sets start to change, because the things that you make boundaries around early on in a relationship tend to start to morph into different kinds of boundaries when you're in a long-term marriage relationship. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of what we wanted to go over today. It's kind of a long introduction into what we're wanting to talk about, which is how do we as guys make healthy boundaries and not be like women?
So what I want to do then is, since this is kind of your topic, I want to ask you a couple questions so that we have a foundation for what we're talking about.
This is an interview now. All right.
I think it'll make it a little bit interesting.
Okay.
So
I'm with it.
Okay. So what would some short-term toxic behavior be versus long-term toxic behavior? Because when we're just talking about, toxic relationships, like we have to define what what does that mean? What is a toxic trait? So that I want your opinion on what would be a couple short-term toxic traits to where you would be able to say, okay, this is clearly not something I want for the long term. I'm going to bow out right now. Versus when you're in a 7-year marriage with kids, what are some of the toxic traits that you think are going to come up then?
Okay. So I'm going to use the same trait, and then I'm just going to augment it for the different years. How does that sound? Because I think it's a lot of the same stuff.
Okay.
It just looks a little different later on. So an early toxic trait, as far as I'm concerned, let's say that you've gone out with somebody like 3 times, and all of a sudden that person starts texting you multiple times per day, making sure that they know where you are.
So clinginess, basically.
Well, okay, but this is the thing, is that somebody people might be like, oh, that's so sweet. They want to know where I am. And then if you don't respond within 5 minutes, they text you again. And then they say, oh, by the way, why don't we go ahead and put the Find Me app on your phone and my phone?
Obsessive.
And it becomes a little, so that to me is an early on trait where it can kind of look cute. But if you've only been out on 3 dates and that person's like, I need to know where you are all the time. And I mean,
you can see it's basically codependency.
It's basically, well, it's dependency. It's like, I need to know, but it's also control. There's a whole piece of that where control is like that was always for me, one of the biggest red flags is when somebody didn't trust me. But even, I mean, when you're in a early on relationship, we haven't even had time to build that trust. So what's with the expectation? So that was always a big one for me.
Okay.
Is that whole clinging thing that.
Well, and so it sounds like clinginess turns into control, obsessiveness, and trust issues.
Right.
That's like 3 other red flags.
Right. Those are huge red flags. But at the start, when someone's texting you, hey, what are you doing? Where are you today?
Yeah.
It's like, I'm at work. How about if I call you when we get home? Okay. 5 o'clock comes around. I haven't heard from you yet. I just got off work. What's the deal? So that's an early on kind of red flag, starts to look a little toxic and can go down a really ugly road. Okay. 7 years down the road, you have had a good relationship, you've fallen in love, you've gotten married, and now you have there's the same thing going on. Okay. Like, okay, my wife wants to know where I'm at.
Well,
or there's texting that's going on. So the same activity down the road, there's a trust. Now all of a sudden we have something that looks more like a trust issue because I'm already connected to this person and I have a responsibility if I'm at work, I should be at work. And if there's a question about where I'm at, okay. Turn that around for a guy. Guys, it's like, hey, what are you doing? Where are you at? When? Blah, blah, blah.
Well, that's like it. No, sorry, go ahead.
Well, no. So it starts to feel toxic, but there's usually a different basis for it. It's not usually about control or obsessive-ness because at that point, in the long-term one, and you're 7-8 years down the road, I think it's more about trust. And so now, if you want to get out of that toxic kind of, that starts to feel a little bit like, okay, why does my wife not trust me? Why is she constantly texting me? Well, now all of a sudden there's something going on where she's building a story in her head because of something that's going on in the marriage where she's feeling uncomfortable or she's feeling anxious about the relationship or there's something. So that's where there's a conversation that can happen that can solve that. And then some agreements that could be made about, okay, well, how can I meet your need to know that I am where I say I am. And at the same time, I don't feel like you don't trust me. So there's work that can be done in that part of the relationship, but very different kind of a flag, even though it's kind of looks like the same behavior.
Yeah, but I think you're right where it's different because when you see it right off the bat, you think of past trauma. She's probably gone through a lot of exes who have been very promiscuous and did a bunch of shady stuff around her. When it's in a 7-year marriage, it's almost like, whoa, okay, where did this come from? And that's more so, it's not, I wouldn't even see it as a red flag necessarily. I would see it as, whoa, where did this come from? What did I do that made her think that she can't trust me anymore?
Right.
So that's where the conversation, just like you're saying, that's where the conversation comes in as to, hey, where did this start? Like,
Right.
and I mean, it could be, let's say you got a promotion at work, and now you're spending more time
Right.
at work,
10,
very
11
late.
hours.
Right. You're
Right.
spending a lot of extra time at work. You're staying late. You're doing all this stuff, and she's starting to build the story of like, oh, or maybe you hired a new assistant. It's like
It could be any number of things.
It could be all these little tiny things that she's connected, which to me is somewhat valid, because I'm kind of that way where it's like if I see a lot of dots that could make a reasonable story in my
Start
head,
connecting them.
I'll start kind of building that out. And then the problem is when someone starts doing that, they also start to add in extra information that isn't actually relevant to what's going on. And so that's why, I mean, I would be understanding of how she's feeling, and I'd want to get to the root of the problem and make sure I alleviate all of the trust issues. And obviously, and there's a bit of sacrifice, because you're going to have to come to a compromise of, how can I make this better? Even though I didn't do anything wrong, how can I make this better for you?
Right. How can I make this more comfortable? And that's the point. Now, here's where it gets toxic, though. And this is where they end up going down roads, is if there is a guy who doesn't know how to set an appropriate boundary at that 7-year and doesn't know how to talk about it. Like, just, I'm not doing anything wrong. What are you doing this for?
Defensiveness.
This total defensiveness.
Defensiveness turns into more trust issues.
Exactly. So now the conversation doesn't happen. Everyone's building their own story.
Yep.
And all of a sudden, this conflict now starts really escalating into a toxic relationship that bleeds over into the rest of the family. The kids feel it. Everybody feels it.
The dog feels it.
So the conversation has to happen. Otherwise, this thing that could be probably taken care of pretty quickly with just a few conversations and a little bit of romance and maybe some love and just a few other things.
A couple of back massages,
just
solve
some
this
attention,
right out.
But so I think that it's different but it can turn into the same thing. It can turn into a bye-bye problem.
Yeah.
And that's where the toxic comes from, is that, but in that case, toxic is now a two-way street.
Right.
Early on, toxic can sometimes feel like a one-way street where it's like, I'm checking out.
Well, and again, I don't even think it's toxic for her to have those thoughts and feelings if there's enough evidence and enough unknown.
Right.
For her to make that assumption. So, I mean, at that point, it's not toxic. It becomes your responsibility to not make it toxic.
Right.
Or, again, vice versa. If she's doing things, it's your responsibility to bring it up in a understanding manner and have questions so that she can answer them without her needing or feeling the need to get defensive about it.
Right.
It's the same thing. It's each party's responsibility to handle the situation in the most appropriate way so that no one feels like they have to get defensive. Because as soon as anyone starts making accusations on an innocent person, their immediate response is usually defensiveness, because they know they've done no wrong. And so if you want to bring up something that you feel like is an issue with someone you've known for a long time, it's your responsibility to make sure that you're not presenting your argument in a way that makes them want to get defensive. Because as soon as they get defensive, that's when it becomes toxic.
Right. Now, that sounds easy.
I know it sounds easy.
But after 7 years of marriage,
yeah.
And let's go back to our
7 years of already communicating with each other, basically.
Right. But you also have to. Let's go back to our last episode where we talked about a little bit about emotional intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
Is you're talking about the ability to be emotionally intelligent and not freak out and know how to have a conversation. And I'm talking to dudes because this is a big. Women are better at talking about their emotions. Men, as we talked about last week, if they don't have another option, they just get angry.
Yep. Go straight to anger.
And as soon as you get angry, now that actually creates a. It actually was like, well, what are you being so defensive for? What are you so angry for? It must be happening. So
right.
So, men, we have to be more intelligent with our emotions, and that's what we talked about last time. And we got to know how to do this, and that's where that's why I thought it was really important for us to have this conversation today, because I think learning how to set boundaries and then engage that emotional intelligence simultaneously is a really great way of, one, keeping yourself safe, and two, having really great relationships. I mean, there's simple things you can do. And I was, part of my job is to educate young people in healthy relationships. That's just part of what I do, right? So I watch a lot of curriculum, videos about stuff and I was watching one last week for young kids, and they did this really simple thing for young kids. And I thought this would be really great for people just to know when it comes to doing healthy boundaries and having healthy relationships. They were talking about 4th and 5th graders, 4th through 6th, right? And they were saying one of the lessons they have to learn is to teach kids the difference between a stormy relationship and a sunny relationship. And I know that sounds like really simple, but I was like, wow.
Yeah, but the best ideas are always the simplest.
You know what? That might be a 4th through 6th grade kind of message, but to be honest with you, if more people learn how to identify stormy relationships, and they were all talking about this same stuff. They were talking about a stormy relationship being red flags to something that might be toxic to you. And the whole idea was know the difference between the two. Let's teach our kids how to do this at young ages, and then set your boundaries based on whether they're stormy or sunny. And I thought, what a great way to talk about it. I know that sounds real simple and like kindergarten.
Well, then you probably got one kid that's like, my mommy and daddy are in a hurricane.
Well, and that, you know what? That's actually really good for kids to actually have some kind of language.
Yeah.
To talk about what they're experiencing, whether it be with their friends, with their parents, with their siblings. I mean, because you can have stormy relationships with anybody, and you can have sunny relationships with anybody. Family is actually the best example of some of the worst stormy relationships that we will have throughout our lives. So I just thought it was really interesting. And so I thought I would at least share that with everybody, because I thought it was really good, just as a way of saying, okay, simple way, stormy or sunny, what is it? And it's not that hard to figure out.
I'm sorry. I can imagine some guy hearing this and then seeing some toxic girl that he's about to get into a relationship with. And it's like, you're an accumulonimbus bitch. I don't like that.
Well, you know what? Good for him. He's identified a stormy relationship.
I would love that. That needs to be on a t-shirt somewhere. Don't be an accumulonimbus bitch. Oh my god.
All right.
Okay. So
that's toxic.
Okay. So that's one that is what's the word? Multifaceted. Okay. So what's another one?
Another toxic thing?
Yeah, and we're starting with short term. So if they correlate between the both, then great. But we're starting off with like short term, and obviously you haven't really been around that since
it's been a while.
For a while, but okay. I'm sure you understand.
Oh yeah, no, I understand. So no, I still remember my college days, even though it's been a while.
Well, women have changed.
Not as much as you might think. I know that every generation says, "Oh, we have it worse." We all had it worse in some way or That's
another.
Right. We've all had that. Okay, so I think another, and this is more of I think it's a red flag more than a toxic, but it can become toxic in a weird way, is when someone's commitment level, when one person's commitment level is obviously way, way above somebody else's commitment level.
Right.
Okay. And that just lends itself to all kinds of problems.
Right.
So I think that's one of those things that can become really toxic when I'm like, hey, I'm just dating and I'm having fun and I really like this person and we're really enjoying it. This kind of relationship, we've been dating for a couple of months. It's great. And, you pick up your, supposed girlfriend and she's got wedding magazines sitting on the table and you're like, whoa.
Oh, and see, I thought you were talking about the reverse, where you're actually committed and they start being shady.
Well,
I mean, that's the other side.
That's the other side of it. I mean, I think it goes both ways.
Yeah.
But it's just that whole idea of, one person is way, way more committed to this relationship, and the other one is like, well, hey, this is fun. I'm
having a good time dating.
And and I think a lot of times the difference there is one person's ready to get married, and the other person is still sowing some royal oats. And that happens all the time.
I think you also have to take into the fact that other people come from very different kinds of relationships. I mean, you could be dealing with someone who, let's just say like myself, who rushed into their last relationship and got engaged within 6 months. The reason that relationship failed is because I didn't take the proper time to get to know this person on a really deep level. We were great together for our entire relationship. I mean, the relationship was fantastic. The problem is I rushed into it without really getting to know her. I mean, we were living together within 4 months, and then we were engaged within 6. So now coming out of that, I'm looking at relationships differently, to where I don't want to, rush into an engagement within 6 months again. I'm probably going to wait for at least a year's mark before I decide to start making any big moves, just because that's where I come from. And so it's kind of going back to that level of understanding that you have to have with every new person that you get involved with. Is you really got to think about what you've been through and what they've been through, and where you guys are kind of at that.
Well, and I think this is really important as we're going to get into the whole idea of boundaries in a minute, because this is part of the conversation of what kind of boundaries do we make.
Right.
And boundaries, when you say boundaries, a lot of those are like personal boundaries, but you're also talking about boundaries that are agreements. Right. About at what point are we going to, and you don't want to do this on the first date. If you want to see a red flag, don't have this conversation.
Right. When you do it on the first date, boundaries seem like barriers.
Well, boundaries seem like crazy. It's like, hey, we're going to have a great dinner tonight. Okay, but before we go there, I really want to know where you're at as far as marriage.
Yeah. Well, okay, but hold on. I think that some boundaries on the first date are pretty important.
Oh yeah. Okay.
One of those things that I would want to know going into the relationship is, am I the only guy that you're seeing, even if it's a first date? Because I don't want to feel like a sucker, and I don't want to get into a possible relationship with a girl who's seeing like 2 or 3 other guys, who's going on dates, who's doing all this stuff. It's like, that's a boundary for me. It didn't used to be, but it is now. I don't want to feel like that, like I'm in a list or in a roster or in, it's like, I don't want to feel that way. So, I mean, next time I start going on dates, I'm going to have a couple things that I want to talk about almost right away, because I've got some new boundaries that I haven't set before, and I don't want to feel like I'm getting into something that I'm going to regret necessarily.
I'm sorry, when you said that, I had the idea of a basketball team where like the girl's like, all right, next one up. All right, you're on the court. Come on, take me to dinner now.
The problem is that's an actual thing.
No,
is women my age do have rosters, and so now having that new information, I'm like, okay, this is something I'm probably going to start bringing up on the first date. And their reaction to my question is probably going to tell me everything I need to know. If they get defensive about it, I'm like, oh my God. All right, so you probably do, and you don't like me talking about it. Have a nice night. It's like,
before I spend anyway.
Right.
Okay.
So I think there are some boundaries that really should be set within the first date, within the first, couple weeks of talking. Is there should be some almost non-negotiables.
Well, yes, but you know what? Here's the thing, and I think that people are taking relationships, and I understand, and there's a certain age at which you don't want to screw around anymore with just getting out dating. But I think there's a lost art. Here, we're going to go ahead and get into dating here. But I think there's a lost art.
Oh, I see. You're making a little segue into my dating life. That's why you wanted to talk about this.
No, but it's working out quite nicely.
The fact that you're not making eye contact means you're lying.
So, I think we've lost the art of just being friends. Like Like dates are like these big serious things, and I know that this current dating culture, there's a whole hookup culture where it's like
it's really hard to be friends.
It's like, why have people lost the art of going out to get to know each other without there being all these expectations of whether or not it's a date, whether or not it's what are we looking at here? Are you dating other guys? It's like, why can't you just go out and have a nice night and be like, hey, it was really nice getting to know you. And then I don't understand this. When I was in college, when I asked a girl out to go to coffee, I wasn't like actively saying you're going to, this is a dating relationship. Most, I would say 95% of the time it was, I think you're kind of nice and I'd like to get to know you better. And if we end up being friends, that would be cool. And that's what happened 99% of the time. And then I found my wife. But I don't understand why there has to be all these expectations on a first date when it feels like just get to know that person, because if you're not their friend first, I don't care what kind of relationship you get in after that, if you haven't spent enough time with that person to know that they could be your best friend, then you're probably not on the right road yet.
Yeah.
And I feel like we've lost that idea that I need to find my best friend. If I'm going to spend the rest of my life with this person in any way, shape, or form, if they're not my best friend, well, I'm screwed from the beginning then.
That actually, I saw this quote the other day that reminded me of, it was, we spend so much time trying to figure out who we're going to grow old with, we forget to find who we can still be kids with.
Yes.
Like that's what that
perfect.
Made me think of.
Yes.
is and I think that's the culture that we have right now is, if a man and a woman are going to be in the same room alone together, then it's like, are we looking at a long-term future instead of, can we just have a good time?
Can you play?
Right. Can we? Yeah, exactly. So, and I'm not really sure kind of where that got mixed up. I know I definitely have a problem with that, and mostly I think that's just because I'm so used to I'm so used to just dating, or I was so used to just dating, that trying to be friends with a female that I find attractive, it's hard for me not to automatically want to pursue more with her. And if there isn't that connection, it's hard for me to want to, oh God, how do I put it? It's like, if I can't see myself having a good time in a relationship with her, I don't see myself having a good time being friends with her.
And that's the problem.
And that, I'm sure, that is the problem.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
Because I can tell you that, and this, oh God, I can't believe I'm going to say this, but there were a lot of women who I was friends with, and I was good friends with them, and I loved them to death. But I was not attracted to them in any way, shape, or form. They just were not attractive people to me. And unfortunately, some of those relationships, those friendships ended because it was one of those, they were attracted to me, I wasn't attracted to them kind of a thing. And that, obviously happened the other way several times too. But I never had an issue with being good friends with somebody who I wasn't attracted with. In fact, most of the time, those were some of my best friends.
Thinking about it, I think there is actually another reason why it's harder for men and women to just be friends.
Why is that?
Going back to trust issues. Cheating and promiscuity is a huge issue in today's dating culture. And the thing that gets most people in trouble is the best friend. It's the, oh my God, no, I've known him for years. He's like my best friend. He's basically a brother to me. Or, whatever the case. I've known her for years. We know each other so well. We hang out all the time. That always, always, always leads to massive trust issues, because now when you're dating someone new and they've got these people, these men or women or whoever that they're talking to on a regular basis that they know better than you, for one thing, if they're attracted to that person that you're seeing, they're going to start trying to implement all these little tactics to make you break up with them so that they still have a chance. This is a real thing. Really, the guy best friend or the girl best friend are usually the biggest problem in a lot of couples' relationships, because there is a attraction that the person you're seeing doesn't see, but that best friend always has that thought in their mind of, man, one of these days I'm going to smash. One of these days I'm going to hit it. And it's a disgusting, horrible thing, but it's a real thing. And so men and women, I mean, again, this is kind of one of those rules that I have for myself. I won't be friends with a woman in a relationship because it's not fair for me to cause her partner undue anxiety because she's now hanging around with another man. So, and the thing is that if I become friends with a woman and then she gets into a relationship, I'm going to wipe my hands because, again, I don't want to invoke anxiety in whoever they would like to see because that might ruin their relationship that I'm around.
Okay. That makes sense.
And the same thing when I get into a relationship, all of my female friends, well, not that I have any, but any female friends that I would have had,
but evidently you don't have any because they all have boyfriends.
I know, and that's the thing. So I don't have any female friends because most of the ones that I would be friends with are in relationships, and I'm not going to get close to that. And then any women that I used to have in my past, I cut off because I was in a relationship, and I don't want to cause my partner anxiety.
And that's, you know what, that's...
So it's kind of like this weird convoluted system.
But, at least there's some character in there that says, I'm going to respect the sanctity of a relationship.
Right. I don't want to
screw it up in such a way that I don't want to screw somebody else's relationship. If there... not that there's any weirdness, but if there was any weirdness, I want to avoid it. So, good for you. That's a lot of character. I don't know what the solution is there, but it just seems to me that we've lost the ability to just be friends.
Yeah.
And maybe it's because everyone's so vested in having a relationship. I don't know. When I was in college, there were all kinds of people just single. There were single people, but you know what? It was because we were all happy being single. We didn't want to be in a relationship.
Yeah.
We wanted to just hang out and be with our friends. And that was a really important part of my experience in college, was being a single person that just...
Okay, but so let me ask you this, and we're kind of going off track right now.
Yeah, we're going to get back to the boundaries in just a second.
So, how many female friends that you had that didn't have one side of the relationship being attracted to the other person?
How many?
So, if you had female friends and you weren't attracted to them, were they attracted to you?
I can honestly, I can probably look back and there was only like 2 or 3.
Really?
2 or 3 people that were just really good friends where there was never anything there. 2 or 3. But
so that's what I'm saying is, for the most part, there was attraction.
Oh yeah.
On one side or the other, which again is kind of why I think it makes it complicated for men and women to be friends, because if you're going to be friends, that means you find enjoyment within that person of the opposite sex. And that leads to attraction.
Well,
even if there might not be some there at first, because I've been in situations where it's like, you know, you're cute, but I'm not really interested necessarily. But then the more I get to know them, the more attracted I'll become, because I get to know them more and I start to like them a little bit more and I spend more time around them. And all of a sudden, oh shit, I think I really like you. But she might not feel the same way about me because she's never actually had that attraction for me.
Uh-huh.
And so then it becomes complicated because now I've got all these feelings and now I'm seeing her date other people and do all this stuff. And then it starts to make me jealous. And it's just so complicated.
Your life is really complicated.
It's so complicated. So now I'm at the point where I just don't even really, like, I can be friends with you, but I'm going to keep it pretty platonic. And, I don't know. I'm not really looking for...
Really surface. Okay.
Right.
Well, okay. And here's the other thing, too, is that there is something to be said about different types of intimacy, because that's where attraction comes from. I mean, when we talk attraction, most people are like, okay, do I think you're sexy? Okay, no. Attraction has like 7 different levels.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there's one thing about the sexual attraction that everyone kind of thinks about, but there's actually stronger attractions that will make it more dangerous for people to do dumb stuff. And that's actually has to do with intellectual attraction, spiritual attraction, when you're like on the same page or have a spiritual connection with somebody who is, you know, not your partner.
You share the same moon sign.
It's something like that. But I mean, it's funny because attraction has so many different... So what you're saying is that as you get to know somebody more, there's other parts of them that are become more attractive because
Right.
intellectually you become attractive, or you have the same morals and values, and all of a sudden, hey,
Right.
this is a nice man. Anyway, I get it. Okay, let's get back to our. Now that we've
Right.
talked about
Yeah,
Zach's
okay.
dating life,
Yeah, shut up.
hey, we finally
I
went
love
there.
how you found a way to segue that into my dating life.
Well, you segued it there.
I guess I did help a little bit, but it's interesting. It's an interesting conversation,
It's an
especially
interesting
since this is not somewhere I've been before.
Right.
Where I've been single for like 3 years, and dating to me is just not really appealing anymore because for the most part, the women that I find attractive are just not necessarily the kinds of women that I would date, because the attraction kind of stops at a physical.
Yep. And if it stops there,
If
red flag.
If it stops at a physical, I'm just
There's
not
a
interested
problem.
anymore. But then all of the women who have other qualities also have barriers that block me from even wanting to. And so at this point, I'm just like, all right, your turn.
Yeah, patience.
I'll leave it up to God.
Patience,
And,
young
know,
Jedi.
he'll put the right woman in front of me when I'm ready to meet her. So
Okay.
so let's get back to boundaries. Okay,
Okay.
so we've talked about clinginess. That's a short and a long-term thing that have
Yeah.
two different connotations. There's two different ways of handling them as well. And then commitment issues.
Yeah.
Okay, so is there anything else?
You know what? Those are the main ones. I mean, really, I think those are the main. There's all kinds of red flags.
Okay.
I think when you get into a relationship, but
How about character? What kind of character would be a red flag for you?
what kind of character would be a red flag for me?
Yeah. What kind of character traits are not very appealing when you're meeting someone for the first time? Or, first date or whatever. Because there is bad character. People have bad character.
You know what? It's now this one's hard because I have to really go back into my memory about what a red flag would be as far as character is concerned. I think for me, I think one character like red flag would be if somebody was so self-involved. I mean, I think that's a red flag when all they can talk about is themselves and don't ever have any interest in the other person in the relationship. I mean, that just feels like that would be
Right.
awful.
Well, because that brings things like entitlement. That brings things like narcissism. I mean, that's kind of all encompassing. But,
Yeah.
Greediness, selfishness. It's always,
those are all tied together into one character.
Yeah.
When somebody is
Self-involved.
narcissistic, then they have a lot of those characteristics. So that I think that would be one that would drive me. Like that would be one. It would take me all of about 5 seconds and be like, no.
And you can tell that kind of stuff pretty quickly, I think.
Right. And I can't really come up with something like 7 years down the road because that's one of those things. If it shows up early and you didn't see that as a possible problem, well, you bought the farm, man. I don't know what you would do with that down the road.
Yeah.
Because that is one of those things that when you talk about somebody with like narcissism, then that plays into every other part of your marriage and existence from that point on. But okay, I'm not going to take that one any further.
Okay, so in terms of, we've got 3 good short-term red flags, basically. What are the kind of boundaries that you would be setting when meeting someone for the short term? So let's say if you're thinking about long term, you want to get more involved. How do you set those boundaries so that you can basically see if they're admitting any of those? Because I think that's kind of how you draw it out.
Ask the question again.
Okay, so say you're meeting a girl and you are considering getting into a relationship, going on a couple dates, all that kind of stuff. What kind of boundaries are you going to be setting with her so that you can see if she has these red flags?
Well, I mean, I think the thing, I don't know if this would be even, when you're talking about that kind of stuff, it really is how you ask questions. This wouldn't be a boundaries thing because, I mean, if you set a bunch of boundaries in the first date, I think boundaries are one of those things that you have to have done intentionally long before you ever get to the first date with anybody. I think there's certain things when you're talking about boundaries, you're talking about a very different set of things that you're putting into place specifically to keep yourself safe. So when you get there, you don't even get to the first date.
Yeah.
Because a lot of this stuff is like, anyway.
Okay, so then with that being said, what kind of boundaries would you recommend young men set?
Okay.
Just, before relationship, all that, what kind of boundaries do you think young men should be setting for themselves?
Okay. I think numero uno, especially when we're talking about young men, is the ability to say and hear no. I think that's something that you have to, this comes back to emotional intelligence too. This just comes back to having character. Is a boundary is, in a relationship especially, you have to have the ability to say no. If you don't feel like you have the ability to say no, then you've already lost. I mean, that is like, if you've already lost a big part of yourself. At the same time, you have to be able to hear no. Because if you say no, and then when someone says no to you, and you're like, well, why not? And you have a big fit.
Yeah.
Well, okay, that is just really immature, number one. But I think that you have to be able to say no, but hear no. That's numero uno. I think guys just need to figure that one out right away. Let's see. I wrote down a few things. Let me see if I can.
What about, I'm sorry,
Okay,
I don't
go ahead.
wanna, but let's also talk about boundaries that you're setting with current people. People who you may have felt disrespected by in the past. I found this quote real quick. Being loved is the minimum. Make sure you're also being valued, respected, prioritized, supported, and understood.
Okay. And I'm going to say that's great, as long as you know how to also give those. Right. I think that no matter what you do with the boundary, if you're willing to set a boundary, you also have to be willing to accept somebody else's boundary in that place, because that's a really nice list.
Two-way street.
It is always a two-way street, and I think that's key to almost any boundary that you set for yourself. I think another one, I mean, I love that quote. Another one, though, is that your opinions do matter. In any relationship, your opinion should matter. So having respect for somebody else's opinion, and at the same time respecting theirs, without it being a fight. Mm-hmm. I mean, opinions are just opinions. Now, I know that opinions can be touchy, and people can get really out of sorts when you start sharing an opinion. I know I've been there. And I know the people in my house have shared an opinion, and after that event, I didn't talk to them for a year.
Well, we all want a hill to die on.
Yeah, but the problem was that there was an opinion being shared. There was no expectation of an opinion being, an opposite opinion being shared. And it was just toxic. That was the definition of toxic.
It was a my way or the highway.
It was an attack.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, I'm not going to have. So the boundary for me in that case was, I can't be around this person. So I'm going to let that relationship cool off. Mm-hmm. And it cooled off for almost a full year before those people kind of came back around and were a part of our lives again. And that was because I felt so disrespected in my house with some of the opinions that were being shared in a public setting. I mean, in a kind of a large group. So, but I think that's really important, is that, hey, I'm okay with somebody sharing their opinion as long as they're not tearing me down in the process and giving me a chance to share equally my opinion of that topic.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said about make sure that your opinion doesn't tear down someone's worldview.
Yeah.
Or that's not the goal of sharing your opinion. The goal of your opinion should never be to tear down someone's worldview.
It should be to inform of what your
It should
world
be able
vid-
to express what you believe in and
Right.
allow them to agree or disagree. That's what a conversation is.
Right.
That's what a conversation should be.
Right.
It's an expression of opinions without trying to devalue or destroy someone else's worldview.
Right.
So I completely agree.
Hold on, I have to take off my glasses and read this one. Okay. And I think this is one that I think we could all learn, okay? The ability to be kind to yourself, simultaneous to not getting in the way of someone doing that for themselves. It's about selfishness. Now, selfishness, it's so funny. I think nowadays we've gotten into a society where we say self-care is not indulgence. And I absolutely believe that. I think that's actually really a positive thing, that taking care of yourself is not a negative. All right? Unless someone who takes care of themselves is at the expense of somebody else's health or well-being. I think that's a boundary. Setting a boundary for yourself to say, okay, it's okay for me to do this right now. But to always have what we talked about a long time ago, of that inner dialogue of, it's okay for me to take care of myself right now, but how does this impact other people? And how can I do this in a way that isn't going to negatively impact somebody else? I think that's really important.
It reminds me of another quote that I heard. It was a conversation between these two people. This woman had said he had gone away for a little while. He basically vanished. No one knew where he was. And so when he finally came back, she was obviously pretty upset. And she said, hey, we were all really worried about you. Why did you just run off like that? And he said, for the first time in my life, I finally felt peace. And so I'm not going to apologize for being happy. I think there is something to be said about people who seclude themselves for an extended period because for one reason or another, the world has disappointed them so much they have to separate from it.
Mm-hmm.
And I get that.
Yeah.
Like, separation, the word separation has been viewed so negatively because everyone feels like it's the same as abandonment. If you're separating from something, you're abandoning something with it. And that's, in my opinion, that is completely wrong. If you need to separate yourself from a person or a group of people or an entire situation and an entire community, an entire environment, if you need to separate yourself, I don't think you necessarily owe anyone an explanation. If it takes care of you and you're the only person that knows exactly what you're going through, then separate.
And that's the boundary that you make when you find a toxic environment or relationship. This goes right back to what we started talking about.
You have to know when it's time for you to separate.
Yeah.
And at the same time, you might also have to realize when it's time for someone else to separate from you. Because we also have a need, maybe not a need, but a desire for attachment. Obviously, if there's someone in your life that you are, you care for so much, but they keep doing things that not only hurt you and hurt the other people around them and hurt themselves, then now it's up to you to allow them to separate, because they might need to figure something out without you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a really hard lesson to learn, because now you have to let go of your selfish desire to stay attached to them so that they can find peace without you. Because some people need that.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people need that.
And it's the knowing when.
Yeah.
It's the we've talked about wisdom, and we've talked about discernment quite a bit. And having discernment to know when you hold on and when you let go.
It's a song. It's not a song.
I don't think so, but
anyway, sorry, go
somebody
ahead.
Probably wrote that at some point.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
In the 1960s when they were taking a lot of drugs.
Live or let die. That's what that is. It's live or let die. Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
Well, that just ruined that moment.
I have a habit of doing that. I swear every time we get into a moment, I say something stupid.
But it really is. It's the wisdom and discernment to know when that happens.
Yeah.
When to do that. And that's part of the boundary set. Hey guys, this is the deal. You've got to know yourself well enough to know when it's time to let go and when it's time to stay there. And the discernment and the wisdom to know at that point. So, I mean, I think it's really, really important for you to create those internal boundaries so that you can stay away from, and this is what I was getting at early. These are all things you do long before you get into a relationship, because these are the things that you do or know or understand that make the relationship. When you set healthy boundaries, I think it's important to understand that we're all whole people. Okay. I am 100%. Actually, I'm about 200% right now, but I'm still working on losing some weight. But I'm 100%. I am a whole person. I was a whole person when I was in college. I was a whole person when I got married, and I'm still the same whole person. Okay. So I love my wife. I love your mom. You know that. Just love of my life, always has been. But I'm a whole person, and I didn't need a woman or a wife or a relationship to make me more of a whole person.
It wasn't about finding your better half.
No, because there is no half.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing for her. She's a whole person, a successful, really cool person. And she always has been. So it's okay to be a whole person and not need somebody else. And know that. That's one of those boundaries that I set. I knew I was a whole person when I was young. I didn't need another person. I came to grips with that when I was in college. I did not need to get married. I was cool with being single because I was a whole person, just me and God, and I was good. But it was when I got to a point where I met somebody that I wanted to connect with another whole person. That's when it was so cool, because it wasn't because I needed her. It was because I was choosing. And I think that's why our marriage has been, 29 years down the road. We're still married. We still kind of like each other most of the time. But I think that's why it was successful, is that we chose. We didn't.
Well, and it sounded like you both came into the relationship with firm boundaries set.
Yeah.
It was like you both already kind of went through that process of setting boundaries for yourselves.
Yeah.
And you made that apparent pretty early.
But we were also both, we were 25. I was 25. She was 24 when we met. She was in her career. I was in my career. We had already both graduated from college. We had kind of been down those roads. We weren't young, we weren't real young, but we came into it having that knowledge. And I think that was a big part of us being successful in our marriage. Now, that's not to say that we didn't have to recreate boundaries. We went through the 7-year thing. Actually, we went through it at 3 years. We went through it at 7 years. We went through it at about 10. We went through it several times, because as you grow older and your kids grow and your job changes and all that stuff happens, you have to reset some of those. And so there have been some times when we've had to have conversations to be like, okay, where are we at now? And when you guys all moved out and we were kind of not here with kids anymore, it was like, okay, now what do we do? So we kind of reset the boundaries there, and then we live a little bit differently now than we did 10 years ago. But we knew how to talk about it. We knew how to set boundaries because we had been doing it our entire lives and our entire marriage. So I think that's why we're successful. But that whole idea that I am a whole person without another person is something I had to know before I ever started going down dating or marriage or any of those things.
And that's a whole process within itself. And so I'd say it sounds like if you're going through a period where you feel like you need someone else to make you a whole person,
That's the worst time
It
to start
sounds
dating.
like you got some work to do.
That's
I
the worst
found
time to get into that.
I found another quote that sounds like it pertains to this, and I really like it. If you disrespect yourself, you will allow everyone else to do the same.
Yeah. You've got to be able to respect yourself.
You've got to be able to love yourself as a minimum. You have to make sure you value yourself, respect yourself, prioritize yourself, support yourself, and understand yourself.
And this goes back to a conversation we had before we ever started this episode. You also have to learn how to be forgiven.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times being able to do all of those things means you have to get rid of all the shame and all the guilt and all the crap that holds you down and learn how to accept forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
And when you can't do that, it's really hard to maintain. I mean, you could fake it till you make it, I suppose, but it's really hard to do all of those things and love and respect and all of those when you're carrying guilt and shame and all of that baggage. So start with learn how to accept forgiveness. However that works, we know we have a way that we know that works for us in our faith, that forgiveness comes through God and forgiveness comes through Jesus Christ. But that's a big piece of this, is that if you don't know how to forgive yourself, all the rest of that stuff is really hard. And then it starts to look like pride, and it starts to look like conceit, because you're pushing how to do that rather than accepting those as realities, because you don't carry guilt and shame. You've accepted forgiveness. I think that's a key. So if you want to set a boundary for yourself, learn how to accept forgiveness. The rest of that stuff tends to be a whole lot easier to think about yourself. And when you think about yourself that way and you've accepted that about yourself, that's what you're promoting to other people. And I got to be honest with you, when you start promoting that to other people, it makes people want to know who you are, because that is not a standard in our society today.
Right.
People don't know how to do that. And when people find someone who does, they're like, there's something different about that person. I want to get to know them.
Well, the other thing is, boundaries aren't respected like they used to be because no one has any.
Yeah.
That's the thing, is what I found, especially within men. Men's standards and boundaries are judged so critically, yet women's boundaries and standards are glorified. Which is
a double-edged sword in and of itself.
So for the guys out there, in my opinion, it's time you start setting some boundaries, no matter what anyone else says.
Yeah.
Because no one's going to respect you if you don't have boundaries for yourself. They might hate you when you do, but I'd say it's better to be hated and respected than hated and... I don't think people hate you for it. I think people hate you for it. People don't like it because as soon as you set boundaries, it makes them uncomfortable that they have to keep themselves to a different standard that they don't want to keep themselves to.
Yes. But I don't think they hate you for the boundary. They hate you for the boundary because then they feel like they have to set that boundary for themselves. And so, oh my God. And so you're making me, it's about whether or not your boundary is about me or your boundary is about you.
Yeah.
So when my boundary is about me, let's just use drinking for an example. All right. I don't drink much. And when I drink, I usually drink at home. I don't like to drink out a whole lot. Right. Well, there are times when I'm out to dinner with people and they're like, aren't you going to drink? I'm like, nope, I'm not going to drink. I'm just going to do water. And it makes them uncomfortable.
Well, it's that whole...
But it's like, no, that's for me. And I'll say, hey, that's not about you guys. You guys can drink all you want. I have other things I want to do tonight. And so I'm not going to drink. And usually people are okay with that when I make it not about them, but about me.
Well, and that's the thing is people tend to make it about them as, oh, Mike's too good for us. He doesn't drink. He's too goody two shoes. He's, too holier than thou to drink.
And that's the thing is all these people know I drink. I just don't drink when I'm out at restaurants typically because I don't like to drink and drive. Obviously, DUI is not a good idea.
So the secret there is you make sure you set your boundaries with other people right away.
Yeah.
So that they're not questioning why you're doing it after they've known you for so long and they're like, oh, what, you're too good for us now? You're setting all these boundaries? Like, no, you set them right away so that people know exactly what they can expect from you.
Exactly. And then people don't resent it.
Right.
They know they're walking in, they know exactly what's going on.
And you're probably going to keep a lot of the toxic people out of your life when you start setting boundaries sooner.
That's exactly
because toxic people hate boundaries.
You're right.
So let's wrap this up. If you guys liked the video, leave a like, comment. What are some of the boundaries that you've had to set with people? That's a good one. What are some of the boundaries you have had to set with other people? If you, obviously, I feel like this is a much longer conversation we could have here, but we are on a time limit.
Yeah.
Seriously, we could have taken this to
we could have gone so many different places.
Red
and
flags
we'll get back to
green
your
flags.
dating life and some more time.
And so honestly, if you guys want to see a longer form video of this and a more in-depth, explanation of what we, the kind of red flags that we see and the boundaries that can be implemented, I mean, seriously, let us know, and we'll definitely think about doing a longer form episode on this topic.
And we'll do it again, right?
Yeah, we'll absolutely do it again. So leave a comment, leave a like, make sure to subscribe so that you don't miss any more episodes. And remember, do not be an accumulonimbus bitch.
Well, on that note,
we're gonna make that into a shirt.
We're gonna make that into a shirt.
All right. We'll see you next time.
See you next time.
Bye.